Hi everyone, it's Wendy. Welcome back to Show Me Mo Vegan and a recipe video. Today I'm baking, which is not something that I do very often, but this is a recipe I've been wanting to share with you all for a while. I actually teased it several weeks back in, I think, one of my CSA videos. I'll try to link it in case you haven't seen it. But in that video, I showed it along with a meal I was having and said I was going to share the recipe. But then it got really hot and I didn't want to be baking, but we finally have had a little bit of a break from the heat, so I thought it was a good day to go ahead and make this. Plus I had some ripe bananas that needed to be used, which is one ingredient you need for this recipe. Two of my favorite baked goods are cornbread and banana bread, and this is basically a mashup of those. So it's a banana cornbread, and it could be made more sweet or more savory. The version I'm showing you today is pretty plain, but you could sweeten it up with some date sugar, cinnamon, ginger, maybe some fruit, or you could make it more savory and add herbs like parsley and scallions, maybe spice it up a little bit with some hot peppers, but we're just going to do the basic banana cornbread today. I personally have never been much of a baker, mostly because I'm lazy in the kitchen and baking is so complicated usually. You have to measure everything precisely. Plus, I always make a big mess. I've actually found that since switching to a whole food vegan diet, I don't mind baking as much. You don't have to worry about cross-contamination with eggs or the sticky, gooey feeling of oil. When you're using whole foods, it makes it a lot easier. Plus, you don't have to worry as much about being precise with your measurements, because the reason why baking is so precise is usually in your traditional baked goods, you're trying to go for a very particular texture. And you can get that when you're using refined flours and sugars, but when you're using whole food ingredients, you're never going to get that perfect texture anyway. So I find that I don't have to worry quite as much about perfectly measuring everything. When you're using a whole grain flour versus a refined flour, the texture is going to be a little more rustic. So let's gather all the ingredients and see how it's made. So the way I came up with the recipe is I actually started with the cornbread recipe that came on the package, and I made it vegan and then also used a little bit closer to whole food ingredients. The recipe on the back of my cornmeal calls for the cornmeal, buttermilk, which I'm going to make out of soy milk and apple cider vinegar, all-purpose flour. Instead of that, I decided to use oat flour. I left the sugar out completely, I left the salt out, and then I'm using the baking powder, the baking soda, and then it also calls for eggs and melted butter. And my bananas and flaxseed are pretty much taking the place of that oil and egg mixture. And since I'm using cornmeal and gluten-free oats, this is a gluten-free cornbread. Here's how I make it. The first thing I'm gonna do is make my buttermilk replacement. So I have 3/4 of a cup of soy milk. To make a vegan buttermilk, you need to use a plant milk that has a higher protein content. So that would be something like soy milk or a pea protein milk. And then I'm adding a 1/2 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. So you simply pour the apple cider vinegar into the soy milk, let it sit for a few minutes, and it will start to curdle. Next, I have my bananas. I've already put the bananas in a nice big bowl, and we're gonna mash those with a fork. You wanna make sure to use some really ripe bananas so they're very sweet. I left out the sugar from the original recipe, so the only sweetness we have here is from the bananas. Again, if you wanted to make this a little sweeter though, you could add some date sugar for some extra sweetness. Once our bananas are mashed, I'm going to add a tablespoon of ground flaxseed. And mix that around. Next, I have my oat flour. I don't ever buy oat flour. I just take rolled oats and blend them up in a little tiny blender. So you have this nice oat flour. I started with 1 cup of rolled oats before blending, so it'll end up being a little bit less than a cup of oat flour if you were just using oat flour. So I'll add that into our banana mixture. And then next I have a cup of the cornmeal. that around. And I'm going to switch to a spoon. Then I have the baking powder and baking soda. I'll have a recipe with the exact amounts in a blog post linked below. And just that quickly, our soy milk has curdled. I don't know if you can see that. So you've just made your own homemade buttermilk. And we'll add that in and then mix everything. And that is what your batter will look like. And then you could choose a casserole dish or a muffin tin. The one I'm using is 8 by 11 inches. And if you wanted to, you could put parchment paper in this, but I find that it doesn't stick too much. And anything that does stick, you just have to soak it in hot water and then wash it off, and it'll come right off. And then gently spread it out. And my oven has been preheating to 375, so we'll pop this in the oven for about 35 minutes. All right, my friends, it has been 35 minutes and our banana cornbread is done. It smells so good in here. Just imagine your favorite banana bread and cornbread baking at the same time. Of course, it's always good to let your baked goods cool a little bit, but nobody has time for that, right? So I'm gonna dig right in. Every time I've made this, 35 minutes has been perfect, but everyone's oven is a little bit different. So to know when it's done, it'll be perfectly golden all the way across with these little cracks, so you can see some of the banana peeking through. So a toothpick method won't really work because of the bananas, it'll still be sticky, but you can press gently and it'll be pretty uniform throughout with just a little bit of give. And then since I didn't use parchment paper, I always go around with a knife to help free it from the sides and make it a little easier to get out. And then it's always a trick making sure you get it out nice and pretty. Let's see if we can do it. Oh yeah. All right, time for the taste test. It has a nice crispy crust on the outside, and the inside is a little gooey with little crunchy bits of cornmeal throughout, and it smells so good. This is great just to eat by itself, but it would go great with a chili. And like I said, you could make it sweeter. You could drizzle some date syrup on this and eat it for breakfast. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up if you liked this video. I hope you'll give this recipe a try. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.